And we are recording. Cool. All right. Well, like I said, thank you guys so much for joining. This is a meeting of the Tampa Pardot Community Group. Tampa loosely, because I've never had an in-person meeting, so it's just everybody, and I just happen to be in the Tampa area. But thanks for joining. This is a kind of extension piece of a blog post I wrote on the Demand Gen blog about database cleanliness. It's kind of a topic that I have some passion about because it's something that kind of feeds everything else success wise. At least at least when it comes to marketing automation and email marketing, and especially in B2B. So we are joined by Al Iverson, as you see. He has a couple of things that he'll be a couple of slides towards the end, and I'll be kind of asking him here and there to kind of give his thoughts and input. Um, so just a bit about myself. I lead the Pardot slash account engagement, if you will, practice at BDO Digital. You can find me on Twitter at Ben Lamoth. And I also lead the Tampa Pardot group. And I will hand it over to Al if he wants to do his own little intro.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. I'm Al Iverson. I am product manager for our suite of deliverability tools at Kickbox. And prior to that, I was the Director of Deliverability for Salesforce for a good 15 years, both working on Marketing Cloud and Pardot.
And you also run the very, very popular spam resource blog that everybody should be subscribed to if you're not already. It's if email marketing is something that you have that is part of your part of what you do every day, then having those kind of insights around the particulars around the technical aspects of email delivery is very valuable. He's been putting that blog out. He's been regularly posting that blog for what, 15 years, 10, 15 years?
21 years, actually.
21 years, actually. Wow. So this is he goes way back in all this, and he updates it regularly. There's a tremendous amount of good data and information in there, so I encourage you to check it out. It's spamresource.net. Right? Okay. Source.com. I will put a link to it in the chat. Encourage you to check it out. He's got some really, oh, there we go. You just did it. Yep, spamresource.com. You can get it emailed to you, or he's posted about it a lot on his LinkedIn and his Twitter. So it's a lot of really good information. Very valuable. So this is the original blog post that kind of came that I wrote. And after I wrote it, I was like, you know what? I feel like there's some room here to kind of have a more expansive conversation. And I reached out to Al, and I asked Al if he would be interested in lending some of his advice and insights and talking specifically about Kickbox and things like that, because I referenced Kickbox in the blog post, and he was happy to oblige. So I appreciate you coming here and sharing some of your time with us, some of your insights and expertise. So let's kind of start off. So the whole idea and the whole subject at hand is around database cleanliness within Pardot. If you are a Pardot user, admin, if you're new to it or you've been doing it for a while, you know that there's that based on the model for how Pardot operates, it's around number of mailable prospects, and the number of and mailable here in this case is people who obviously can receive your outbound email. It's really important that your email, that your database, the lists that you're sending these emails to are of people who you actually know exist, are real, and that you have confidence in, those records. Because if you've ever been on the wrong side of Pardot when it comes to getting flagged for low deliverability, you know that Pardot takes it very seriously. And if you were to send, for example, an email, the last threshold that I heard about was anything sub 90% deliverable can trigger some alarm bells. And I've I've unfortunately I've been on the wrong side of that, and usually that's because I had an executive tell me send to everybody, even though over my protests not to. I was told to do it, and then we ended up getting our hand slapped. So anything sub 90% deliverable, with from out of Pardot, there is a decent chance that someone that you will get reached out to and be asked um, to validate, to confirm that these people have opted in to your emails, and that they expect to be receiving email from you, and that you have not violated the permission-based marketing policy that little box that you have to check every time you upload records into Pardot, to confirm that these people are actually in that there is this expected kind of engagement happening. It can kind of you can be kind of turned into kind of twisted in the knots a little bit when you have to try and find a way to explain how these people signed up when they may or may not actually have, or your opt-in process is a little shaky, doesn't wouldn't really stand up to scrutiny. So I just in an effort to maybe try to avoid some of those awkward conversations, database cleanliness, making sure that you're sending to records that are good and that are validated and that are engaged, will help you ensure that your deliverability rates stay at the very least above 90% on your email sends. So some of the advantages of keeping a database clean are, some of these you would think are pretty obvious, but I've had to explain this to a lot of people when they're like, "Why does it matter if I run these people through an email validator or whatever?" And there's some kind of five topics that I tend to touch on. Is the first one is having stronger reporting. When you're marketing to prospects with a valid email addresses and also an established engagement history, you have a higher probability that they're going to respond to your messaging, and that is going to give you kind of net a better KPIs. Better Your reporting will look better. While it may feel like, oh, I'm sending to less people than I thought I would, the people that you are sending to are responding in ways that are good for your overall reporting. Also, I put in here lower software costs because if you're familiar with how Pardot's process worked, as I mentioned, you have mailable prospects. Everyone except for premium starts with 20,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, 10,000 mailable prospects. And that's not a lot. A lot of orgs will immediately need more than that. Every time you hit your database limit, you need to go back to the well and go buy another block of 10, 20, 30, 40,000 records. Those cost money, obviously. By implementing some of the things that we're talking about here, you will either delay the frequency with which you have to go back to the well, or maybe even entirely remove that. If you're saying I want to stay within, if you know your addressable market, say I'm not going to exceed 20,000, having this process in place will allow you to ensure that the records that you have in there are good records, that they're engaged, that they're real. And because otherwise, if you're the way I try to explain to people is that the mailable prospects you have in Pardot, you are paying for the privilege of having them in your database. And if they are not worth the money to the organization to have them in your database, that's where you want to maybe evaluate, who do I actually want in here? Who actually should be in here? And should we be keeping a close eye on who is in here? Now that philosophy doesn't work for everybody. There are others that have huge databases and have huge needs, and that doesn't apply. But for others, for them, I would say more often than not, kind of embracing that philosophy either in part or in whole, will you will see a improvement both in reporting and also in your costs, because you're not having to go back to Pardot every 6 months and say, oh, I need another 20,000 records, because you're not cleaning and maintaining the database you have to make sure that your database is continually healthy. The next point here is around sales intelligence. So when a prospect email address is flagged as being invalid during a cleanse, you can let sales can be made aware that these email addresses are no longer valid, so they don't waste time and resources chasing unreachable leads, people who have left that job, people whose maybe their company's security has changed, and now they're not and now the way that they receive email is more heightened, like the security is more heightened. So being able to pass this data to sales will help them in making some of their sales decisions. Higher email deliverability rates, I kind of touched on that earlier. Anything sub 90% will more often than not trigger that message. And then the last piece here is around email sender reputation. So if you've done any kind of research into evaluating how the recipient email servers see you as a sender, email sender reputation is one of those topics, is one of those things that is increasingly important. And there are there are enterprise level spam evaluators, if you will. And that's not the official term. That's kind of how I think of them. Is that your level of trustworthiness, your level of where your reputation lies, and they will. And there's in different email providers, email not providers, email databases, email servers will rely on either one or maybe a few different spam services. Say, oh well, Spamhaus says this, Cisco says this, and they'll kind of take those collective and say, yes, this is based on these three different providers for evaluating spam. We're going to render our decision as being this. Do not allow email from this sender because overall they have a poor reputation. So having high sender reputation, by you get there by having a clean database, ensuring that you're not hitting spam traps. I have to tell you, the first time I explained spam trap to somebody who wasn't involved in email marketing, I like they were it was kind of it was amazing. So they're like, so they just put out email addresses just to like catch people, and I'm like, yeah, in a roundabout way, that's kind of how it works. Is that if you're sending email to this email address that would only exist because a spam house or whomever created it, they know that you got that email through kind of nefarious ways, or definitely not an opt-in process. So that will send a message say they're not using the most, I don't know, ethical ways of getting their record, their prospects. So whether it's a spam trap or having high opt-outs, having high bounces, being seen as a high volume sender, being sending email on a dedicated IP, but having inconsistent sends where it's peaks and valleys, where you're like 1,000,000 sends, 5,000 sends, 2 billion sends, 50,000 sends. Like that kind of waviness can be a can send some negative indicators, I'll say, to those that evaluate your sender reputation. By having the highest sender reputation score, you increase your deliverability rates, you increase the likelihood that your emails will be delivered, and which will then obviously have a downstream effect on your on your KPIs and things of that nature. So when looking at kind of the first steps to take here, what I recommend is the first thing is identifying the right cleansing tool for you. There are a bunch out there. I've tried most of them, and while they all, to a degree, they're kind of flavors of each other, there are some that do have a bit more behind the scenes. I would consider Kickbox as one of those that there's more there's more strategy, there's more intent behind the tool, and they spend a lot of time tuning it and making sure that it fits the evolving needs of the industry. Having someone like Al on board is certainly huge because he's able to spearhead new projects and kind of continually enhance it. There are other tools out here that will provide you firmographic data. They'll say, oh, based on what we see, we think that this end user is female, that they're this, that they're that. I always take that a bit. I don't always buy that because I'm like, how did they get this from an IP address? But they're grasping a little bit, and so I wouldn't. It may be valuable as like among the other data points, but different ones will give you different outputs, and they'll have different ways of evaluating whether or not an email is good, is sendable, etc. These are the three that are the ones that tend to have the most popularity. There was one that was popular for a little while called Bright Verify. They've kind of taken it. They've, in my opinion, that's not as strong as it maybe once was. They've been overtaken by more by others that put more into their product. The next thing is to determine the risk level. So there are, when I say risk level, um, Ringlead is a little different. I don't think that Ringlead is really a validation tool. Um, Cheese question, but we can certainly address that. But when I say risk level, I mean you can either be very like, I'm only going to take records. I'm only going to include records that are green, that are say 100% valid. But if you see that of the 50,000 records that you uploaded, only like 6,000 of them met like the green threshold, you're going to be like, I don't know that I can sell this to my executives, that I can only send 6,000 emails. Um, Figure out what your threshold is, what your risk threshold is, and if you're okay sending to what some call accept all and and uh, valid, you're obviously going to increase the amount, but you're also going to increase the amount of risk, the amount of unknowns related to your email sends. Um, so each of them, I would encourage you to, whichever one that you use, and investigate how they do their evaluation, and how they and what the outputs are, and evaluate what your total post cleanse numbers look like. The next thing I would say is create your custom fields in Pardot. One of the things that I recommend is having these custom fields as you're doing recurring cleansing. So you have a value there that says date of last cleanse and cleanse status of accept all, valid, whatever it is. So you have it associated with that prospect record and the last date that that happened. The next thing you want to do is create these dynamic lists. And what I'm going to get into in a second is creating these dynamic lists will help you kind of rethink your, I guess, your actual addressable database. Because just being mailable shouldn't be enough. You need to know that of your mailable, you've got this separate database of mailable and valid, or mailable and your actual marketing database. So creating these dynamic lists with this criteria to say, this is my database. Once you do a re-import, will help you. So the next step that I'm going to talk about is doing like a full export of your database to start off on the right foot. And you're going to want to, like I said, export your entire database. So your entire database of mailable, your entire mailable database. So it could be 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, whatever. This is where the pricing starts coming in. Some have different pricing models. Um, so I would study to see what their costs are, what their bulk rates are, and run them. And then once you find the one that you like, and you're able to get coverage for the pricing, run it through this verification tool. It could take a little while, because especially if it's a huge, if it's a lot, it could take some time. But run it through there, review the output, and then do the thing I said previously: re-import your records into Pardot. Make sure you have those custom fields, and then review these new dynamic lists to see, okay, now that I have these, who's actually in it? Is it collecting the right people? And I have update existing, which means what I was referring to before, of if you do what I would recommend, which is to now have your new marketing database, and you have a bunch of dynamic lists, update your dynamic list and say, is a member of the cleansed marketing database, and all the rest of your criteria. That would give you a stronger list that you would be able to have more confidence in. You don't have to do that. That might be, some people might see that as being too excessive. That's fine. But if you're wanting to have this like sub database of the records that you are the most confident in, that is one way to go about that. So the next part of this is to setting up a recurring cleansing process. So you have your, obviously you did your one big one, but time goes on. You need to have a way to capture these records that are coming into your database that have not been cleansed. So as you know, with Pardot, the Pardot Salesforce integration, if you have that turned on to create leads and contacts, to create prospects in Pardot when they get created as leads and contacts, you're going to assign them to a source campaign. I would recommend creating a record, whether it's an automation rule or a dynamic list of records that have the like the list option could be prospects with Salesforce integration source campaign in a null value in the cleansing fields. Those are going to be like, yes, those are new, have not been cleansed yet, need to be dealt with. You can either do it as a list or as an automation rule, and run an action on them to update their to run them through a future cleanse. And you could do it monthly, quarterly, depends on how much data is net new data is coming in. That's going to dictate how frequently that you need to do your cleansing. If you're getting a ton of data every week, it may be a weekly thing. It really just depends. Um, you so I mean, I have two options in here: dynamic lists, all prospects with a Salesforce integration campaign. So it's with the campaign of the Salesforce integration and a null value. Also, all prospects with a null value in cleansing fields and has not been sent an email in X days. So that would give you the people maybe who have been imported through other ways, either through an API integration or through a list import. Um, um, that would be a way to capture them and say, okay, these people came in through another way. They still need to be cleansed. And then setting up a recurring time frame to export the records, cleanse them, and then re-import them. And then the other side of this is prospect suppression. So the first part is clear, just like, all right, this is a fake email address or that's not real or whatever. But this next one here is records that exist in your database but are not engaging. I can't tell you how many times when I've done audits, I'm saying, hey, you've got all these records in here. You're paying for 50,000 records, and of those 50,000 records, 30,000 have never been active, never engaged in anything, and you're paying for them to be there. And they're like, really? What do you mean? Yeah, and it can be kind of shocking because you don't, Pardot doesn't really bring that to your attention. So you have to kind of proactively look for it. And once you see it, you're like, oh man, okay, so this is a problem. If these people, so what I recommend is, and this should be done after the cleanse. So once you've done the cleanse and you've got all your mailable records, now you're saying, okay, I've cleansed them. Now I need to know who in my database is not actually engaged. And what I recommend is creating a is um, is creating either an automation rule or dynamic list. Prospect created date is after a specific date, and prospect is not related to an open opportunity. That's critical because you could have people who are in your database haven't really responded to you, but they're relevant because they're part of an open opportunity, and you may need to send them email as part of a sales push or sales a kind of help sales along. So anybody who is a created date of the last, let's say, 100 days, 60 days, and however strict you want to be, and they're not related to an open opportunity, and the last activity date is either null or has not been updated in more than 90 days. Those are the ways that you would be able to say, okay, based on all these criteria, my read on this is that these people are not engaged. Another way to do this is to say, to be even more aggressive, is say prospect created date is after a specific date and last activity date is, let's say, so this would be the other way to create engaged prospects. Created date is after a specific date and last activity date is in the last 30 days or has opened an email in the last 30 days and cleansing status is not null. So all those things together will say, okay, these are people who have engaged with email from me in the last 30 days and they have some age on them. So they're actively engaged. They're not just like part of this brand new intro campaign. That's I wouldn't consider those people to be engaged just because they did a thing and got an email from you. If they've got some engagement over time, say, okay, this is my this is a good core part of my database. Having these two together to say create a criteria for those that are unengaged and those that are engaged will give you the yin and the yang. Say, okay, this is what I'm calling engaged. This is what I'm calling disengaged. That's going to be hard to come up with. People are going to disagree with you. And what's going to happen is when you come up with your unengaged prospects, you're going to have a lot of records that sales are like, I'm actively working them. Don't kill this. And they're going to be like, they're bringing my numbers down. I don't know what to tell you. There's going to have to be an agreement between sales and marketing on what that criteria is. It's going to be hard, but once you guys get to an agreement, everyone's going to benefit. So the next thing you want to do is review your list results and run an automation rule or an engagement studio to set them to opt it out. Do not set them to do not email. Set them to opt it out because there are ways to modify that. The another way to do is to send them to the recycle bin. You can't do that through an automation, but you can create a list of records. Say, okay, as using this criteria, instead of an automation rule, do a list. And then every 30 days, go to this list of people who have met the unengaged criteria, do a table action, select all, send them to recycle bin. They can come out of the recycle bin and not and their mailable status won't be affected in that way. So they can even bring themselves out of the recycle bin. If they fill out a form and they're in the recycle bin, Pardot will automatically bring them out. So they are engaging and thus making themselves eligible to come back. You can also just bring them back yourself. If you need to go back in and say, whoops, didn't mean to do that, select all these people and undelete them, bring them back into the database. But by sending them to the recycle bin, they no longer count towards your numbers. They're no longer part of your email lists. So you're getting rid of these unengaged records. And while your total list sends are going to be smaller, you're sending to a more engaged audience, and they are going to give you better KPIs, and it'll just look better across the board. So this is kind of what I was saying here: creating a dynamic list, prospect not engaged, and then once you have these two lists, the prospect engaged and not engaged, you can create one that says prospect for a recurring process. Prospect is not on engaged prospect, and it's not associated with an opportunity. So you've set this engaged list. So anybody who is engaged is already going to be on this list. You want to know anybody who is not on this list and it's not associated with an opportunity. From there, you can use an automation rule or an engagement studio to say, set them to do not email or opted out, or add them to this other list that you're going to then use to delete or send to the recycle bin. I want to make a note to make a point to check how the automation is performing. If you noticed, so you'll notice that if the automation rule starts, you will notice that the automation rule will probably start affecting records that you didn't mean it for it to affect. So you will have to kind of go back and tweak it, saying, oops, nope, I need to be a little more exacting with the criteria because it's picking up people that are not supposed to be part of this suppression. I'm just saying it now that it will happen. You will find yourself kind of needing to go back and say, nope, this is a little too broad. I need to kind of tweak it and turn it. So, but doing everything that I just recommended, both the immediate and then the process driven, will help to ensure that your database is a lot cleaner and a lot healthier. And your records you will be able to have confidence that the records in your Pardot database are engaged and cleansed. You're removing the possibility or limiting the possibility that you're going to get blacklisted or that you're going to have deliverability issues. That's not going to eliminate it, but you are being proactive in trying to reduce any of that from happening. And so with that, I'm going to hand off to Al. He's going to share some Pardot deliverability and list hygiene best practices and talk a bit about Kickbox. So take it away, Al.
All right, thanks, Ben. Next slide. So without going too far afield into more general deliverability, I wanted to at least give you a little bit of an overview. Can you go to the next slide there, Ben? Thank you. As I mentioned, I was Director of Deliverability, overseeing Pardot deliverability for a good long time. And people do always ask me, so what are the basics as far as where do you get started as best practices for Pardot deliverability? And that's probably here. A lot of overlap with what Ben said, especially about focusing on unengaged and suppressing unengaged subscribers. I'll talk more on that in a second. There's links to all of that too. I'm sure Ben will give you a copy of the deck at all. The real key takeaway here is deliverability success reflects your data. It's reactive to your data. It's very hard for even the best email platform to deliver to bad addresses successfully. That's sort of the key thing that a lot of your executives, your bosses don't always understand. They think Pardot ought to be able to get the mail through. Salesforce ought to have an agreement with Microsoft. They have an agreement with Gmail or Yahoo. That's just not how it works. It's very data driven. It's very automated. ISPs have these black box mechanisms that decide what mail comes through. It's not based on who you know. It's not based on agreements between companies. It's all based on good stats being able to be measured by the ISP. Next slide, please. So, this started out as a joke that deliverability people send to each other. This should I use a purchased email list? But it's helpful because I took it and I added some links to it as to why purchase lists don't work as well as actual opt-in first-party data. So it can come in handy if you need ammo to try to explain to somebody why third-party data is a problem. And keeping in mind, email verification is not it's not a very good turd polisher, pardon my French. It's not going to be great to sort of restore really bad like purchase list data. We bought a list of millions off of eBay or something. That's just not what it's for. It's all about validating your first party data to identify bad addresses that can trip you up. Our platform, and hopefully some of the other platforms do this, we actually have built-in monitors that look for flags that would give us an indication that somebody's using purchase data or third-party data, and we shut that down because it's not, our business model is not to facilitate spam. What sets us apart from some of the other providers in that space is we are the only email verification provider who is a member of MAWG, the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group, and that's a group of internet service providers, email service providers, CRM platforms, SMS aggregators, and others who are all sort of on this common mission where we meet up a couple times a year to try to focus on abuse and spam related problems and how to solve those collaboratively. So our goal there is really to enable better use of first party data, not to facilitate use of third party or purchase data. Next slide, please, Ben. And this is stuff that Ben talked about, the generalities of it with previously, so I won't go too long here, but it's very easy to verify addresses in Kickbox. You can see on the side there, you get different criteria back, right? We assign a score. It's called a Sendex score to each subscriber in there. So you can do stuff like you can get fancy and say, hey, I'm only going to continue to mail subscribers who scored above 0.75, or you can get fancier and decide, hey, I want to, if it's commerce related, I might let through everything except the undeliverable, even the risky ones, because we're not saying they're undeliverable. We're saying they're less likely to be valid addresses than the others. So we sort of score it as best we can based on all the other data that we can get from all of that, both from caching and our internal rule set, and also live reach out to try to verify addresses. You see unknown there too, and that the fact of life is that sometimes mail servers are down or don't respond, or block verification attempts. Those will show up in unknown. So we're literally saying, hey, we tried, but we can't tell. What I do is I look at, again, it depends on the use case. If I was doing B2B in a lot of cases, you might say, I'm not going to let disposable domains through, but I'll let role addresses like sales and info through, because I know from my history with Pardot that they show up a lot in legitimate subscriber lists in Pardot. Except all is kind of, that is almost just an informational point that you can't do a ton about today, because almost every B2B domain we run into is configured to accept all. So you get a bunch of data there. There's even more subscriber there. Mike, to your point, what does risky mean? It means it scores lower, usually because of the type of address it is, as far as the email address and domain. If it looks like just somebody potentially typed random letters on the keyboard, but it still passed verification, which does happen. So that's one example where we might show it risky. So we're not saying it's undeliverable, but it is kind of questionable. And so we'll score it a little bit lower numerically too. So that lets it come down lower on a cutoff. Next slide, please, Ben. And that's your legacy data, right? You might take your legacy data and run it through the batch process. You might set up something to run quarterly or biannually to review your existing database to look for bad addresses that you can throw out, so that you can not have to pay to store those contacts, those leads in Pardot or whatever platform you're sending from. But what about new signups? And that's where the API comes in handy. It's very simple to implement a live API process to verify new addresses as they come in. And there's tools that let you bridge that, the automation there too, where like Zapier and Trade.io and a couple of those other different sort of workflow connection tools will connect Pardot and Kickbox if you want to put that in sort of some sort of workflow chain that leads either into Pardot or Salesforce CRM or whatever. So there's a lot of stuff you can do there, and then you get all this information back, including that suggestion. Did you mean? Like if we can tell that that's the address they probably meant that they typoed, we'll give you that back. And if you have your web developer build that into the sign up process, you can actually suggest a corrected address. Next slide there, please. So without getting too salesy, check it out for yourself if you want to. Feel free to email me at al@Kickbox if you have any questions about it later. There's a promo code, Pardot1K, if you want 1,000 free verifications to try it for yourself. Feel free. I welcome your feedback too. Feel free to hit me up there. Next slide. Just keep in mind, there's limitations to email verification too. I don't want to overpromise and not be able to deliver on that. Like, it's some verification providers say, "Oh, we know where all the spam trap bad addresses are, and we get them. Yeah, we'll block them all for you." And it just doesn't work that way. Spam trap providers try very hard to hide because they don't want to be found. They don't want. Their perception is that if you can find the spam traps and get rid of them, you'll just do that instead of really just cleaning up your database overall. So we certainly catch some spam traps. We certainly catch a lot of different types of bad addresses. But keep in mind that, again, bad data finds a way sometimes. And so there's always the case of this is best for first party data for people who really did sign up. And it's not going to sort of save you from a block list issue with a third party or purchase list. And that sort of ties into what else can Kickbox do as far as, are you measuring for deliverability success? Again, I'll keep it short and not too salesy. But on the next slide there, Ben, there's a screenshot of our inbox placement tool. This is seedless-based inbox testing. You send to our list from Pardot. Our system will automatically generate this report that shows you inbox placement. You can click down into it and see a whole bunch of 30 odd different ISPs and see that did it go to the spam folder or inbox and all of those. And you need a third-party tool to be able to do this, because ISPs don't send back disposition information on folders back to the sender. They don't. You get bounces back, and you can read clicks and you can read opens, and sort of, right? Apple sort of screwed that up, but you don't get folder information. And so this type of tool is how you get folder placement information to tell, am I going to the spam folder at Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, etc. Next slide, please, Ben. I think I had something in here too about all the domains. Well, the future one, but keep in mind, like, when you look at it, I talked about Gmail and Yahoo and Hotmail, and you might say, well, these are B2C domains. What about Salesforce? Get an analysis and the top ISPs that host data for Pardot subscribers. In other words, where do Pardot users send the most mail to? And it was Gmail, it was Yahoo, it was Microsoft, it was all of the top guys all the way down, Apple, Comcast. So it's not that much different as far as B2C versus B2B as far as where you're sending mail to. Last thing I'll say about our deliverability tool suite, if you want a free trial or a demo of it, feel free to reach out. There's a link for more info. Otherwise, I'll try not to sell you too hard on it. Next slide, please, Ben. A whole bunch of links for you here as far as where else you can go to learn more about deliverability. I'll put them right here in the chat as well. Some useful stuff, I think, including Ben's own Pardot Geeks blog. If you can stand to it, I mean, I know deliverability can be real dry sometimes, so I don't try to push it too hard and say your whole life should be deliverability, because then your life will be very sad, like mine is. But if you want to learn about deliverability, here's a whole bunch of useful places where you can learn more about it. One final thing there, and Ben actually covered this excellently. When a client asks me, clients often say, like, what is the one thing I can do to boost deliverability? And so the one bullet point to improve deliverability is to suppress, unengaged subscribers, focusing on engagement. Ben touched on that excellently in his section up there, because Pardot has great tools to help you do that. And that is a leg up with Pardot that makes it easy for you to set up automation to identify and suppress people who are not responding to messages. And that is, again, if you had to say, what is the best way to improve deliverability? There's lots of stuff you could do, but what is the one best way? That is the best way. I do believe that is it. All right, thanks, Ben. Where do we want to go from here? Anybody have any questions? Q&A? Ben, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I'm on mute. I wonder if I can take all attendees. I don't know if that's a good idea. I can take all attendees off of mute. That might be a disaster. We'll see. Okay, so a question from
we
Mike.
can start with the chat.
Yeah, the mailbox report, does that just show inbox and spam folder, or other folders too?
So it also shows Gmail tabs. There isn't. It doesn't really show other folders beyond that. A couple, like one Russian ISP, I think, has like a newsletters folder, but we don't break that out. So it's all about, the goal there is try to measure spam folder versus not spam folder, basically. Other Mike had a good question about bot clicks. Pardot helps with bot clicks too. You basically Google Pardot bot clicks, and you'll find the different things that'll help you. There's automatically filtered activity in Pardot emails, bot clicks from Pardot actions and reports. So they have, what is that filter called? They have a built-in filter. Boy, this is probably fun to watch me, to not watch me browse the Pardot help.
Do it all the time.
Help. So Google it. There's a starting point here. Pardot actually has a few different things. You can set up filters. They also have, the name escapes me. They have a built-in thing that tries to mitigate metrics guard. That's it, metrics guard. They have that tries to filter out bot clicks a couple different ways. So yeah, there is some good stuff there. The question is, do those filters become stale over time? Like, do they keep them updated? And I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately, because it's been about a year since I've been gone from Salesforce. But it seems like a good start, and I think it'll help. You got to sort of assume that you might never catch 100% of bot clicks, but at least if you can get the vast majority of them out of the way, it brings your stats a little more closer to earth.
Question from Brittany about wanting to come off of mute. I can try and get her off of mute. All right, I set her as a host. Let's see if she can join. I don't know if she's able to join. There's Brittany. Yeah, okay, Brittany, you can unmute yourself if you wanna ask a question. I don't know if you can hear yourself. If you can, Brittany.
Oh, she had it for a second there. Can we unmute her? No, doesn't look like that.
All right. Well, while Brittany figures out whether or not she can come off of mute, I don't think there's anything I can do on my end to get her off of mute. Unless I can't unmute her. Weird. I don't know why I can't unmute her. Well, no, she's not muted. Oh wait, yes, she is muted. I'm sorry. I don't know how to. I think she just disappeared. All right, sorry about that. I don't know why that's not working. All right, so from Mike, what is the best way to get through Mimecast? Second question: what do you do when you see sent to a prospect was never opened, never active? Is that going to spam folders? Yes, that's probably going to spam folders. Usually, that means it's going into their black hole, and then they're just kind of putting it. Either they're auto deleting it, or it's just, that's typically behavior of like an accept all, where they just take the email and then they close the door. You don't get to see what happened. So in that case, Mike, what I would recommend, and Al, if you have other thoughts as well, but if you have that's a good candidate for two things: either direct outreach, if they are a like account, like an actual account, you would want to look to see who their account owner is, who they're responsible for, saying, hey, I've got all these records. I've been sending them email. Nothing's happening. Could you, if they're valuable to you as the organization, say, hey, can you reach out to them and ask them if they blocked us, and maybe see if their IT will issue you like and put you on the accept list or something. But if they're just a prospect and they're just not receiving the email, and they're part of a larger, typically that might be like the beginning thread. If they're like part of like a Citibank or a huge organization, look to see all your other email sends to Citibank. If you've got 150, 200 Citibank people in there, and a handful of them are getting email, but the majority of them are just sent. Then Citibank may have a rule set up for your email. But the first question about Mimecast, I'm not certain, so I'm curious, Al, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, first, what you need to do is find the secret deliverability handshake so that we can. If you join the secret club of deliverability, you learn who the people at Mimecast are that can help. But they, unlike a lot of ISPs, they don't publish sort of a public-facing page to where do you go to submit information to get unblocked. So that's something where, in theory, Salesforce support is supposed to be able to help you. They're supposed to know they can escalate stuff up to the Pardot and Marketing Cloud deliverability team, and that team will reach out to Mimecast for you specifically. There's a tool called abuse.net. Literally www.abuse.net. You can put in any domain name, in this case mimecast.com, and it'll suggest a specific address to reach out to. In Mimecast case, it says abuse@mimecast.com. So that's a strong implication that does go to a real person, and that's useful for a lot of different domains and companies. Doesn't always mean that person on the other end of that's going to be helpful, but at least it starts. You can at least find a real person there. And Ben, to your point about the subscribers not responding. Keep in mind too, like from the deliverability perspective, at some point, if nobody's ever responding, the best thing to do is to figure out how to suppress them. In other words, like you say, after you make sure, do whatever best efforts you can to find out if it's a real address or not, because it could be like you say, an accept all, it's going nowhere, or it could be somebody who's just not interested. They're getting it and they're never actually opening it. So, and like you say, various things you can do to try to tell good from bad. Another one you can do there is give it time. Like, suppress people after a certain time. You don't have to necessarily be super aggressive, but it might be something where it's after 3 months or 6 months or 9 months of no activity, suppress them because there's nothing happening there anyway, whether or not it's a real person or not.
Yeah. So I'm going to put another one that's, I don't know if it's as popular as it maybe once was, but Barracuda. There was a time when Barracuda was very popular. I don't know if it's as popular as it was, but Barracuda does offer you a lookup for IP reputation. So I put that in the chat. It's pretty black and white. It doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It just says either is good or bad. But if you know that your client or your recipient, whomever, their email security is Barracuda, look there to see if you've got some issues. That's a good way to go. There are so many different tools out there that exist. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good for testing IP reputation. Every time I find one, I kind of just add it to my little list of stuff. Cisco at least had one. No, they do. They have one too. I'll put that in here. I don't know how good it is, but it's called Talios Reputation. Talios Intelligence. And it's for threat data. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just kind of added it to my list when I'm doing like audits, just for another thing to look at. But that's a good one. And what's another one that I like to use? Spam House obviously is a big one. Spam Cop, Domain. You can do. There's a Google does offer you some support with like being able to do like to see how Google sees your IP. But it's a little more tricky, I think, than standard. Because you have to I believe that you have to register the domain. You have to verify the domain, I believe.
Yeah, it's Google Postmaster tools, and it is quite handy. It gives you good feedback that you can tell. It's not always telling you exactly what to do to fix your reputation, but it's great for monitoring your reputation over time.
Yeah, so I put the Postmaster tools link in the chat as well for that. The one that tends to be very popular around reputation is the one from what are they called? Not Talios. It's red. I'm seeing the red email IP reputation.
It's underscore.
Underscore. That's what it is. I don't know how much I trust that. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's, I don't know. It's definitely more for like more user friendly, if you will. It gives you everything.
Yeah, it is useful. I do use it a fair amount, but it does have some limitations though, and that they get a very small sample of data from only a few ISPs. So you can look at it, and if your score is really bad, you might think my score is bad on the whole universe, but they don't see the whole universe. They only see their little tiny slice of it.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're performing like a comprehensive audit, that maybe is one tool that you use. Say, here's what Sender Score said. Here's what this thing said. Here's what MX Toolbox said, and kind of like have it as your kind of like. There's all these different data points. If Sender Score becomes the outlier and says everything else is good, Sender Score says I'm bad, I would maybe look at Sender Score a little more um, kind of uh, as potentially being the outlier and maybe not the one to fully trust. Um, but that's IP reputation is one of those things that Pardot won't tell you. There's no alert saying your IP reputation is in the garbage. Like you'll notice it because of the symptoms. Because suddenly all this email that you thought was good, suddenly you're just getting blocked left and right. And your deliverability is in the toilet, and it seems like it feels like it happened kind of overnight. When in reality, it was building up to that point. And especially if it's a large enterprise and they've got kind of a whole security threat assessment kind of group focused on email, they are going to be continually monitoring and updating the ways in which they evaluate external HTML inbound email. That's like the critical part is if it's incoming, is outbound and HTML, that's going to be the first like, HTML, because that's where things can be especially hairy. But they're continually evaluating. So so you need to also be continually reviewing yourself to see how things are going. It could be it doesn't need to be like an every week thing, but I would recommend maybe quarterly, just to kind of see like Q1 you look like this, Q2 things look a little shakier. I wonder what happened. Sorry, my dog is barking. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that is having some kind of recurring quarterly, twice a year, something like that, just to kind of keep an eye on it. Yeah. Okay. So Brittany, looks like you're off mute now.
Yes, hello. Sorry about that. I had lost audio. Okay, so I have a question concerning bounce rate and sender reputation. So I'm working with a client right now, and they email a large portion of their prospects every day, but they're approaching their Pardot limits, and so they want to cleanse the database. And so an approach that's worked well for me in the past is to slowly email some prospects that marketing hasn't touched in a while, to keep at a very, very low bounce rate, like under 1%, and kind of slowly churn through a mass batch of prospects that are questionable. And so I'm wondering if that's okay to do, and at what point does that bounce rate impact your sender score? Your sender reputation.
Yeah, Ben, you want to take that or shall I?
I think that's interesting. I think it's definitely because unfortunately there isn't like Pardot doesn't have this like separate area saying this is our cleansing and testing area. So it's not going to count towards and so you have to. So having this deliberate approach, I think, is good. Where you're grabbing this subset of your audience. I would do some intermingling. I wouldn't have it be just the ones that haven't been touched in a while, because if you're pulling 1,000 records, let's say, that haven't been updated in a while, haven't been engaged, and it's only those, you're going to find yourself having poor deliverability. So I would take a scoop, like if you're looking at like two parts untouched, one part engaged, if you will, and like continually churn through it using a bit of both. So you're not putting yourself in that position to have a series, like over the course of like a month, having 3 emails you sent that were sub 90%, or that had a high bounce rate or something like that. So because the ones that you know are good, those should still come through. But it has, so you're kind of mixing the two of them, so you're not putting yourself at risk by just only sending emails to the bad ones, knowing that there's a decent chance that it's not going to work out well.
Precisely, yeah. So in doing that mixed approach, I guess I'm wondering, like, at what bounce rate should I tread lightly on?
I mean, a bounce rate, I mean, 1% sounds okay, but again, depends on the volume.
Okay.
So if 1% of 1,000 versus 1% of 10,000, that obviously has different ramifications. So I guess it really just depends on what your numbers are, what your send numbers are. If you're sending 10,000, a bounce rate of under 1% is probably better. But if you're sending it to, I don't know, 1,000, I don't know. I mean, I'm Al. If you have any thoughts on this as well, I'm the numbers in my head are starting to not make sense. So if you want to add some insights as well.
Yeah, so it does vary, like Ben says, but in Marketing Cloud, it's a little more squishy in that. Even if you kept it under 7% bounce rate, right? So 93% deliverable, you're probably not going to have a lot of problems just from that. But lean conservative as much as possible. And this is the only context in the whole world I'm ever going to put those two words together like that. But if you try to minimize it as best you can, right? So if you've got when you're not sending those segments, if you have a pretty good bounce rate, only try to bring in as little as possible, such that you only bump the bounce rate up a point or two, right? And so your key there, and this is a solid strategy where people take the unengaged or the rarely engaged and put them in a separate strategy stream to try to squeeze what they can out of them, right? It's turning lemons into lemonade. And keep in mind that you can't squeeze the same lemons forever, right? Just really put them through the process. Maybe you do a series of win back campaigns, anything over time, but eventually figure out when to suppress them, because after a certain point, you're just sort of wasting effort trying to get a sign of life out of something that's not there. But to that point, your strategy isn't bad. That's very common and right. It's just a question of do it slow. Try not to go much higher than your current bounce rate, right? So that's your defining thing, is to try to make it only bump your bounce rate up another point or two, maybe. And then remember that a lead isn't forever, right? Addresses do sort of churn and get abandoned.
Thank you, gentlemen. That answered my question.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are at time. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's valuable time. I appreciate Al for joining. This has been very helpful. I will be sending along the recording and a link to the presentation following this event. I'm also going to upload the recording to the Pardot Geeks blog as well, so you guys can utilize it there. So thank you so much. We do have another event happening in September where it is focused on B2B MA. We'll have someone who is very good at creating those recipes, who's going to be sharing some quick and easy recipes to build in B2B MA to kind of be able to display data easily and in a way that is impactful. So that is up on the community, on the user group. It's like September 15th, maybe. It's about a month away, I think. So have a look at that. But again, thank you so much. This has been great, and have a good rest of your day, guys. Bye.